of the surface ocean increases. Warmer temperatures, less density. It doesn't include the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, or parts of those. And so the 100-year flood is very important for planning purposes. FEMA puts out a whole series of 100-year flood maps. It's difficult to see, but if you look over here, you can see this cross-hatching area, right? So we're looking at downtown Boston. Here's the aquarium, here's Faneuil Hall, here's the Boston Garden. So under this scenario, this area here in crosshatches represents the area that on average is the 100-year flood zone. So there's a 1% chance in any year that that area is going to flood because of the storm surge. That area under 16 inches of sea level rise would become the 2-year flood zone. So there'd be a 50% chance any year that that would flood. And this whole area in blue becomes the new 100-year flood zone under 16 inches of sea level rise. One flood of this magnitude would cost the city of Boston something on the order of $70 to $90 billion. And it would be really hard to drive through the Big Dig if this happened. The flood would also top the Charles River Dam and get into Back Bay. So you can see here Commonwealth Avenue and A here, all of Back Bay floods as well. So this is under a moderate estimate of sea level rise. A recent paper just came in Science magazine that had good news and bad news. The good news is it's unlikely that sea level is going to go up by more than 7 feet because of melting of the Greenland ice sheet and warmer sea surface temperatures. The bad news is that sea level might go up by 7 feet. If sea level went up by 7 feet, what you're looking at here is high tide in Boston. And that's just not going to happen in Boston. That's going to happen in every major city around the globe, resulting in literally hundreds of millions of environmental refugees. All right, that's the depressing part. Now here's the good part. Why should we be talking about climate change? I think probably the most important answer, and it's even more important today than it was 2 months ago, is that figuring out how we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions is linked fundamentally to renewable energy and energy efficiency. And if we invest in that, we close that energy loop, we close that energy loop dollar so that dollar gets spent in our economy, it's good for our economic development. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is in fact an economic development plan that we need to invest in now. So just let me finish up with this slide. This is a result that has come out of the New Hampshire Climate Change Policy Task Force. Governor appointed, lots of businessmen on it, heads of all the major agencies, and one academic, me. I worked with Ross Cattell on developing the analysis for this graph. On the bottom, what you see are millions tons of carbon dioxide equivalent avoided emissions on the x-axis, and what you see on the y-axis are economic benefits, which is the savings minus the costs. So we've investigated a whole range of strategies that came out of the working groups on changes in agriculture and forestry, on electricity generation, on buildings, and on transportation. Ross did the economic analysis, we did the CO2 analysis. This is in specific for the year 2025. So these are economic benefits of 2025. If we focus on buildings, which are in purple here, you can see that if we increase the efficiency of all the existing housing stock by 60%, right? So we switch out 30,000 homes per year. We make them 60% more efficient. We can do that with technology today. Not only will we reduce greenhouse gas emissions on the order of 3.5 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, in the year 2025, in that single year, we will save the New Hampshire economy $1.6 billion. Right? C&I, 50%, commercial and industrial buildings. We improve the existing stock of commercial industrial buildings by 50%, 50% less energy. New buildings use 70% less energy than the average building does today. We improve the thermal code. We actually have buildings comply with the existing code. Everyone reduces carbon dioxide and saves the state money. Billions and billions of dollars. I feel like Carl Sagan here. If we look at transportation, if we enforce speed limits, that's the diamond down here on the left-hand side. If we just enforce speed limits on our interstate highways, we would save on the order of 0.2 million tons of carbon dioxide and about $100 million a year. If we lower the speed limits and enforce them, we do even better. And if we develop low carbon fuels, you can see we wouldn't save as much money, but we'd save a lot of carbon dioxide. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative now passed, right? We're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 2.7 million metric tons. And in 2025, despite what you read in the Union Leader, it's actually going to be good for our economy because we'll be spending our energy dollars, more of our energy dollars, in the state. And then finally, if we promote durable wood products from our forest, from sustainable harvest, we'll actually reduce it at 500,000 ton of carbon dioxide, and we'll make some money at the same time. So that's the point I want to leave you with, which I think is where the discussion is actually moving, is that the reason that we need to talk about climate change is the solutions to climate change are going to be good for our economy in the long run. They're going to require an initial investment, but they're going to be really good down the road, primarily because we close the energy loop and we spend more of our energy dollar in our own economy.
So we've just seen an 18-minute clip talking about climate change, and what came out of that for you? What was your impression of what was said there?
Well, having seen it live and then seeing the clip as we've just seen it, Cameron Wake is just a phenomenal scientist, and he is very gifted in explaining not only the science, but as we saw, to some extent, the economics of this because of his service on the governor's task force. One thing he didn't show in this in our forum, but I've seen him do, is another just a brilliant graphic that shows New Hampshire migrating down to South Carolina in terms of the climate change and the threat to the ski industry, the maple syrup industry, our four seasons, the foliage. Those things are already pretty much programmed in to the climate as it will almost inevitably change. But he's just a brilliant person, and I think we're lucky to have him here in our state working on this and helping our political leaders, the governor and the legislature think through this, both in terms of what's coming to us and what we will have to adapt to as a state, but also the responses, to think through the science and the economics of our responses. So I think he's just a brilliant guy, just a phenomenal scientist.
Yep, Dr. Cameron Wake and he's University of New Hampshire.
Research professor at the University of New Hampshire, climate. They have a section there on Earth, space, and oceans, and he's a researcher there. But he's all over this issue. He's one of the leaders in the country on this issue.
I know there's some confusion in my mind, and I'm sure there's a confusion in a lot of people's mind, because we talk about climate change, and that's kind of a correct term. Right. We also talk about global warming. It's a little more, it takes a little stronger position there.
That's right.
It's global warming.
Right.
And of course, we've got an equal and opposite group of people talking about, well, dummies, it isn't really a global warming, it's global cooling. And you're going to mess up our economics because you're going to shut down our businesses. And what we're seeing is something that's just the result of natural weather cycling, and whether it's the change in sunspot activity or solar activity. I mean, what do you think about this? Climate change, global warming, global cooling? What do you think?
Well, I'm not an expert, Ivan, but I have a few thoughts about that. And I've learned a little bit about this. I'm not a scientist, but I've learned a little bit about it during this journey on this organization of Just Democracy, working on this issue and learning from people like Cameron. So a few thoughts to come to mind. One of the things that I learned recently, and why I think it's more accurate to talk about climate change than global warming. For example, if we think of rainfall, and we've had floods here in our state,
yes, we have.
A number of floods over the last few years,
yes, we
very
have.
Unusual weather situation. And one thing that was explained to me is that as the globe warms, and we've seen in Cameron's slides just a few moments ago, pretty clear evidence of warming. Why is it that some places get so rainy and having floods like we've had here in New Hampshire, and other places are getting drier? Doesn't that sort of contradict itself? Well, what I learned is that as the globe does warm, places that are hot get hotter, and where there's water, that water evaporates.